I want to thank everyone for coming. You may have seen as you were coming in that this is part of the Texas Science Festival, and we're grateful to the College of Natural Sciences for hosting the Texas Science Festival, which has been a lot of fun. I just realized I forgot my paper. Thank you. I also want to mention we had a wonderful event this morning with our trainees presenting. They did a fabulous job on, so congratulations to the trainees. And I do want to mention a couple of things. If you'd like to get on the listserv for the Texas Aging and Longevity Consortium, which along with the Center on Aging and Population Sciences is presenting the award today, we would welcome it. We also want to encourage everyone to support science by contacting your legislative representatives. You can contact the university on behalf of thanking them for Science Festival, but please take some kind of an action on behalf of science. And finally, I would like to turn to the main event. Today we're presenting the UT Austin Excellence in Research on Aging Award to Dr. Jared Benji. If you would like to come up and receive the award. And we also have some little gifts for you. So, and we will do a few photos, I think, afterwards, too. I do want to tell you a little bit about our speaker. He's a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist and an associate professor with the Department of Neurology at Dell Medical School and at the UT Health Austin's Comprehensive Memory Center within the Mulva Clinic for Neurosciences. As a clinician, he specializes in assessment of Alzheimer's disease and related dementia's neurodegenerative disorders. He has over 70 peer-reviewed publications and numerous international and national conference presentations focusing on technology in cognitive impairment and other aspects of real-world functioning in older adults with dementias. His work has been supported by the National Institutes on Aging, the Alzheimer's Association, the Texas Alzheimer's Research and Care Consortium, Parkinson's Foundation, and importantly, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. So you know how we'll all say, oh, my work is great, but it's not rocket science? NASA's supporting this man. So without any further delay, let me introduce you to Jared Benj.
Thank you all. Thank you, Karen, for the kind words and the invitation here. And thank you to the Texas community, the University of Texas at Austin for this opportunity. I wouldn't be able to do the work I do without y'all. So thank you. No conflicts of interest. I am proud to be supported by so many great organizations, but the things you'll hear today are my views and my opinions only. Okay, so what we're going to cover today is how, I thought of a lot of different ways of framing this talk, but I really want to tell the story that I took to get here. And I want to do that for a couple of different points. One is for those in the room who are trainees, who are getting into science, I want you to see the fun but messy way that careers get built. And so I will show you the messiness that is developing a clinical research career. But the very seed question remains the same. How can we use tech to help people with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia, ADRD? And along with that, you'll see questions evolve from that core question, like how do we understand how older adults are functioning in the real world? Ultimately, what are real brains doing in the real world? And then the exciting potential of can we leverage technology not just to help those afflicted by conditions, but maybe even prevent these conditions from occurring. So, as a clinical neuropsychologist, I am first and foremost a clinician. My job is to take care of patients. And if you're working in the Alzheimer's disease space, the mission that you're trying to do, the mission of those that you serve is very clear. There is no ambiguity about what the research says, but also the hundreds and thousands of patients that I've seen over the years with these conditions. They want to be able to live their life with all the things that they do in their life that make them them. They want to stay them. They want to do these activities independently, and they don't want to be a burden on family. This is the core goal of anyone seeking care for Alzheimer's disease across the board. And so their mission is my mission, and the mission of our lab, and the mission of our clinic. So when you think about trying to address this mission, there are a couple of different things that led me to think about technology as a way of helping older adults with ADRD to function independently. So one is, I was told by a fellowship director that as a neuropsychologist, your assessment begins with the waiting room. Now, I think he may have told me that because we couldn't afford to have a medical assistant room our patients for us, so he made the fellow do that. But we were taught very early on that your assessment begins in the waiting room. You're walking out, you're seeing if someone has a tremor, or what is their gait like, how are they orienting to stimuli. But when I started getting my patients from the waiting room around 2010, I've highlighted this curve. This is the Pew Center. They do a national survey of aging groups. And that bottom group, that light blue curve, is internet adoption amongst older adults over time. And so in 2000, less than 20% of older adults had access to the internet. But you can see we start to see an inflection in the curve amongst older adults around 2010, 2011. And that really correlated with what I was seeing in clinic. I would come out of the waiting room, people would have a Kindle or an e-reader, they would start to have smartphones, they would have the dreaded manila folder of printouts from the internets of things there, right? We started seeing technology coming into clinic with my patients over time. At the same time this was happening, part of the reason I was making so many trips to the waiting room is because I was a clinician. I love research. I always wanted to be a researcher. But when we had our children on fellowship, my oldest turned out to have autism and intellectual disability and seizures. And I panicked. I took the first clinical job I could get. I didn't think I could have a research career because we needed to take care of him. And in the irony of ironies, my research career has really come from watching this individual. You can see him when he was younger, and you can see him in this lower right picture. You see that mischievous grin on his face now that he's 17. He loves cows, and so I took him to Fort Worth to see the cow parade in the stockyards. That is the look on his face right before he's thinking of pushing me out in front of the Longhorns, all right? But if you watch him, as much of a struggle as everything has been, you will notice a device in his hand in nearly every picture that we have. And he, despite all of the challenges, all of the neurological challenges, all of the intellectual impairment, he's a whiz at being able to get his iPad to do things. When we were trying to teach him, individuals with autism have a problem with language, and when we were trying to get him to do language, we would take him to speech therapy and all those things, and it just would not engage with it. But what got him to engage was he learned he could take his book and he could go get a Google image search, and he would go letter by letter matching these things and see that his book, right, existed somewhere else. It became a window to a broader world for him. And to this day, when he's really interested in something, he will try to get it into the internet so he can see it. So at my desk, I keep my badge. I'm a good cognitive scientist, so I have a place for everything and everything in its place. He grabbed my badge the other day, and he, letter by letter, typed it into the internet, and he pushed his headphone back and looked over because he saw that I live on the web too. And so watching him develop with technology, we clearly have reached a tipping point where technology is accessible to those with cognitive impairments as well. And so this is his story as much as it's the patients that I serve story. So the thread we keep pulling as a group is how can we help older adults with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias function better, longer, and independently. And the first place we started with was with a concept known as prospective memory. So we experience memory as one thing. You feel like you're one cohesive thing. I have bad news for you. You are many. Your brain has many different types of memory. So we think about memory as being like, we usually think of episodic memory, remembering that a certain event happened, okay? But there's also procedural memory, semantic memory. There's many different types of memory out there. But when you're trying to help people function day to day, it is prospective memory that is the most impairing deficit for day-to-day functioning. Prospective memory refers to the ability to remember remember an upcoming event. Remember that I need to go to the doctor at this date at this time. The next time I'm at HEB, I need to get this thing. Prospective memory is a very debilitating impairment that can come along with Alzheimer's disease and related to dementia. So if we want to help real people in the real world, let's start with prospective memory as being a way to go. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can try to help prospective memory. You can learn different kind of memory strategies. You can do what's called drill and kill. You can try to practice the skill over and over again like a mental muscle. But when you do a meta-analysis of the data, what you see is that external memory aids are both the types of interventions that tend to have the strongest effect, and importantly, they tend to have the strongest, the most ecologically valid evidence. In other words, the outcomes of those studies tend to be real world tasks. And wanting to help real minds in the real world is what our group is. So how do we do that? Well, think about your life, right? I knew to be here today because my Outlook calendar popped up and told me to be here today, right? I believe many of us use spontaneously a cognitive offloading strategy of technology to help with prospective memory, okay? So, very straightforward question. Can we use these tools in people who have mild cognitive impairment and mild dementia to actually help with prospective memory? So we did a randomized controlled trial where we compared two interventions. We used the Cortana app from Microsoft, and we also, I'm a big believer that we don't do no treatment control groups. If someone raises their hand to participate, we're going to give them an intervention. And so the other arm of this was using the Recorder app to do a kind of a self-memo for prospective memory tasks that has some evidence behind it. We were pretty as rigorous as you can be with behavioral trials. We had good blinding rigor. And the results of our study were fascinating to me, obviously, but I hope interesting as well. So this was an initial feasibility trial. So we had 52 participants with mild cognitive impairment and mild dementia, so on the milder end of these. And we were just looking at outcomes over the course of a month here, okay? And so this group, a lot of these individuals, about 3/4 at the time we did this, we ran our last participant on the last day of February in 2020. Nothing interesting in the world happened at all immediately after that. So we, about 3/4 of them had smartphones. Not everyone was using it regularly, and some people didn't have them at all and had to use a lab-provided phone. And so with our feasibility, we did basically an hour to an hour and a half of intervention, training someone, working with someone, showing them how the device worked and how the different applications work. It was a little quicker using the voice recorder app than it was using the Cortana app. It took about an hour and a half on average for the Cortana app. But what we saw is that individuals were using these devices even with just a one-time training, right? So they would use this for 80% of the days or so. And a lot of that initial anxiety about using smartphones went away after sitting with an interventionist just for an hour. So we had 3/4 would recommend our intervention to a friend after just a very brief intervention. Older adults, even those with ADHD, are remarkably adaptable. They want tools. Meet them where they're at and give them tools, okay? But did it work? And again, this was our first trial, so we were just looking at we were just looking at a 1 month kind of outcome, and we used twin outcomes in our clinical trials. So the twin outcomes are one, a modified goal attainment scaling. In other words, we want individuals to set their own goals for the activities in their life that having good prospective memory would help. I want to remember types of things we'd get. I want to remember when my grandkids' birthdays are. I want to remember when my church groups are. I want to remember when to pay my bills, take my meds. These are the sorts of goals individuals would set for themselves. But then we also use an objective memory task, which was we would give regular and irregular times that an individual would need to call and leave a voicemail, right? So these are things they would have to put into their system, and we could see if it helped them remember those systems. And when you look after just a brief intervention, right, we were seeing success in both conditions on both of those goals. Individuals who were engaging with these prospective memory aids both performed at a level that was frankly impressive compared to other interventions. Even over the course of the month, even though adherence and efficacy dropped over time, still outperforming what a lot of non-external aid treatments would give you. And most importantly to me, they reported functioning better in the real world with the things that mattered most to them. Quality of life increased with this intervention, and even after you control for different conditions, even those people that were on the more severe end of our cognitive impairments could show some benefit from these. So clearly, questions remained from that, right? One is, this was very brief intervention. Do these findings persist? Does it continue over time? And then hopefully some of y'all are asking the other questions that we ask ourselves, which is like, okay, those are both digital interventions, but would paper be better? Is this better than paper, right? Also, when you're working with an individual with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia, you're not just dealing with the patient, you want to help the family, right? This family is trying to support the individual. So what helps the helper more? A lot of individuals in our study would talk about the double to-do list, right? So you have to remember all the things that you need to do, plus all the things that the individual with ADRD does. So which one's gonna help those caregivers have something a little less off of their shoulders and into a system? What about people who experience digital disadvantage, right? What about individuals who are from backgrounds where you're not going to be served by the Alzheimer's literature or by the digital technology literature? What about rural individuals? What about individuals who come from backgrounds where they may not have had as much exposure early in life to technologies? So even though these results were exciting, they begged more questions. All good research leads to more questions, right? So this is what we're doing now. We're doing a follow-up study where we're all across Central Texas. So we have a site at Baylor University, we have a site at Baylor Scott and White Temple, and we have our site here at UT. And we're looking at a 6-month outcome, and we're doing what I call the battle royale between paper calendar versus Google Calendar, all right? So similar sort of thing. We're using similar outcome measures, but we're going to compare we are comparing against an intervention, a paper-based intervention out of the Mayo clinics versus our Google Calendar intervention. And we're looking primarily at establishing long-term efficacy, but our secondary aims is we're co-enrolling the caregivers for individuals with this. So we're looking at caregiver outcomes for our intervention. And we're oversampling individuals from digitally disadvantaged backgrounds, and we're doing detailed qualitative interviews at the end of the study to not just understand what works, but why it works, and why does it work in the particular context of an individual's family situation. Quick plug, because Always Be Recruiting is the name of the game in clinical research. If you're interested in helping or know someone who is, feel free to get in touch. Rovi, the amazing research coordinator, is here as well and would be happy to take your information. So we're excited to find out more. Okay. But our ultimate goal from this line of research is we want to develop easy to implement real-world treatments to help with memory lapses. The current state of Alzheimer's disease treatments is amazing. We're seeing innovations we never thought we would see before. But the end result is that people are going to live longer symptomatically. So the question we have to answer is, now what? And that's what our group is trying to answer with this thread of research. We want to find the right tool for the right person at the right time. Okay, so that's one line of research. All right, there's another line of research here. So we have a lot of scientists and a lot of students in the room. I know we have members of the general public here and online as well. So let me tell you a little thing about the life of an academic. You get no shortage of feedback. And most of that feedback, well, probably for all the brilliant people in this room, it's probably not. But for me, the feedback over the course of my career has been no, bad idea, wrong idea. I get that feedback a lot. And when you're doing these, you almost always get 3 anonymous reviewers, and because they're anonymous, they can say whatever they want. And so our very first R21 for the study that we got there got rejected. I have many rejections, but this rejection started me down a whole other line of research, and so I'm a little bit thankful for reviewer 2, but that took about 10 years. Okay. So anonymous reviewer 2, all right, left this little nugget, right? So they loved the team, they loved the idea, they loved those things, but they eviscerated us on our approach. And the only bullet point on the approach was many individuals, especially those who are older or with conditions who may be more easily intimidated, will basically be poorly compliant and won't be adaptable to use this. Bad study, and you're done. That angered me quite a bit. And so as an academic, if you get mad at something, you write a paper. That is my coping mechanism. I would say 3/4 of my CV is Jared working through some stuff. All right. So I think when I tell people that you just start your assessment in the waiting room, you may think I'm joking. So what do? We went to the waiting room and we passed out surveys in the waiting room, right? And we asked people coming for neuropsychological evaluations how much they were using their smartphones day to day. So this paper published in 2020, but the data is from 2017. And what you can see is that spontaneously, even back in 2017, about 1/3 of our patients were using applications on their phones spontaneously to try to help with memory and other cognitive lapses. So people were spontaneously starting to do this even before we were intervening with them. Caregivers also reported using the phones to help individuals who had cognitive impairment, right? So these rates, even back in 2017, were relatively high. Okay, but we stepped back for a second, and as much as I worked through some stuff with anonymous reviewer 2, there was a concern in there, which is we recognized in our patients in clinic that technology use was being used, that our caregivers were using it, but we weren't capturing that with our clinical tools that we regularly use. So it's hard to have an argument based on science if your tools aren't capturing the information that's out there, right? So you start thinking about that, right? Most of the tools that we have don't capture how individuals are performing what are called ADLs, activities of daily living, and what are they actually doing? How are our patients actually attempting to perform tasks in the real world? So when you look here, you can look at some of the tools that have routinely been used to capture activities of daily living. So one of the most common one, it has over like 30,000 citations, is a tool called the Lawton and Brody Activity of Daily Living Instrument. It was made in 1968, okay? I don't know about you, but that was 22 years before I was made, right? Or 32, no, that was more. All right, so these are older tools, and they include items like ability to use a telephone, dials a few well-known numbers, all right? I have not dialed a number in a hot minute. Matter of fact, if I have to dial a number, it probably won't happen. You're either in my contacts or you're not. What about writing checks, right? The idea of writing checks. When's the last time that you've had to write a check? Do you know where your checkbook is, says the memory doctor. All right. So you can start to see this mismatch between the way the world was moving and the tools that we're using to capture this incredibly important outcome. How are people doing in the real world? So we start pulling the thread a little more, right? So we developed an instrument called the DADAS, the Digital Analog Daily Activity Scale, and we went up the road to Georgetown. Those are literally my neighbors. I live in Georgetown. There's a fantastic organization up there called the Georgetown Neuroscience Foundation. Mike Douglas is in charge of that. He's been a huge proponent of our work and supporter of our lab group. And so we sent out a survey of how are older adults actually using digital versus analog approaches to their day-to-day lives, digital versus paper approaches to day-to-day life. And what you can see is on the right side of the figure, right, you can see that the frequency of digital reliance is quite high for a number of daily activities. With things like appointments and to-do lists, it's a lot more mixed. But when you look at things like shopping, making purchases, credit card versus cash or check, look for maps. GPS, right, is a very prevalent behavioral adaptation that is occurring naturally in individuals that have access to the technology. So you're seeing this shift in digital daily activities becoming more of the norm as opposed to the exception. And despite what you might think, we're not seeing that individuals who are more digitally reliant are actually having more self-reported difficulties. Matter of fact, satisfaction tends to be higher the more digital someone has moved their daily activities, right? And then you have the pandemic, right? So this is some data that occurred about the pandemic, right? So the pandemic was this interesting disjunction for technology and aging researcher where you had older adults who were forced to use technology or get left out of this. And what was interesting was, at least in our sample, and our sample was biased like samples can be, but we had over a third to a half of the daily activities that we looked at, individuals said that they increased their digital activities during the pandemic and they were planning to continue that digital approach post-pandemic. So you start to see this momentum building day to day. So we bring this back into clinic now in 2023 with the help of support from the Alzheimer's Association. And we start to see that digital activities of daily living went from about a third to 50% of our sample reporting using it to over 80% of our sample here at UT Austin in a comprehensive memory center that are using these digital activities. And then the amazing Dr. Miss, my fellow here, y'all should meet her. She's the brains behind the operation. She has a paper under review where we looked at data from a sample in Houston that had younger adults as well as midlife adults, people in their 50s or 60s. And you can't see all the details on this, but what I'll ask you to pay attention to is the blue and the yellow, right? The blue and the yellow are people who are reporting using digital or digital analog hybrid approaches for daily activities, right? And in the younger adults that are the left columns here, you can see that individuals that are going to be my patients in another few decades, right, are increasingly digitally native, like you would expect. But you also see this occurring in individuals with our mean age in the 50s, right? So when you go to talks and you hear, oh, my sample isn't using digital technologies, it's coming. It's coming for your clinic. It's coming for your study. Digital nativism is coming more and more every time. So thanks to anonymous reviewer two, we sit with this. Technology is likely to continue evolving as well. And this has lots of implications, right? So first of all, it's not like tech is done. There's going to be new tech, right? So think about your car, right? Now your car, I'm teaching my 15-year-old how to drive, and he calls it the whiner that's in the car that tells him if he starts to depart a lane, he doesn't like the whiny car, right? But we're going to see self-driving technologies. We're going to see increasing automation in the home. What does this mean for the notion of independence? How does the definition of independence change? How does cognition interface with technology use? Right, you can feel that question start to itch at you here. You also got to think about from a scale development standpoint, if we want to measure these things, it's not like I can just make a new scale and be done. This problem is going to continue to evolve. The day-to-day activities of older adults will change. Let's not keep using tools from 1968 to try to measure something that's so important to our patients. So we're taking two strategies forward based upon this. One of them is we can make better tools. Now, I will warn you for the next few slides, measurement neuropsychologists, even when we go to neuropsychology conferences, they make us present at like the Saturday 7:30 a.m. slot because we tend to put people to sleep. So I'm going to warn you, I'm going to talk about nerdy psychometry stuff, and if you all just want to take a brief nap, you can replay it later. It's better than Ambien, clinically proven, okay? But we don't need to make tools that are static. Modern measurement science has come a long way. If you've taken the SAT, ACT, MCAT, GRE in the past 20 years, you've taken an adaptable tool called a computerized adaptive testing based upon item response theory. In other words, you have a big bank of items, and you select from those items the right ones that help you measure the underlying construct of interest in an adaptable way. These sorts of statistical tools have been very slow to come to clinic. The NIH really has leaned into this with the NIH toolbox. There's a few other groups that are doing it, but it's exception rather than rule, particularly for instrumental activities of daily living assessment. So one of the things that our group is doing is we're really wanting to step back and reconsider how we're measuring activities of daily living for the 21st century and beyond. And so we're going to start with something that's very hard for me, which is to be quiet and actually listen to the caregivers who are actually doing this and usually provide these ratings. Let's start by listening for those who care to get their idea about how our current tools work, things that should be clarified, the types of approaches to daily activities that we should be paying attention to. Listen to those that you serve. If you're designing a research project, try to include a qualitative component to it. You will learn so much rich information about what's happening. And then once we have this new data, let's apply the statistical tool set that has revolutionized every other standardized test that we use. Let's bring the best science to bear for creating adaptable tools that can change over time, that can meet someone in their individual context to select the items that most appropriately measure how someone is functioning day to day. And when we start to do this with we've done this with one small study now, and thanks to the Texas Alzheimer's and Research Care Consortium, we're going to do this with a broader study next. We actually see that asking about day-to-day technology provides a lot more information about how older adults are functioning day-to-day. A more informative tool helps you zero in on functional status and can give you early indicators of decline. So, for example, our item about remembering, having difficulty remembering passwords for online applications, right, was actually one of the most sensitive indicators of early functional decline, right? But you also learned the other way, how technology environments are enabling independence in people with more severe functional impairment. So for example, existing scales tend to say has difficulty operating the stove, okay? And that is definitely a huge problem. But we added an item about difficulty operating a microwave, right? And what you see is that individuals are able to get this, technology is enabling this modified assistance to where people can be quasi-independent for their nutrition thanks to technology in ways that the old scale just doesn't measure. So measures matter, and we can do better, okay? Always be recruiting. If you work with caregivers or are a caregiver yourself, we'd love to talk to you for this wave of the study that's going now. So information here or Rovi the Amazing. Okay. So here's the other thread that kept rattling around in our brain. So hopefully you're convinced by now of the importance of measuring daily activities, right? But if daily life is increasingly digital, can we use digital tools to actually tell how people are functioning day to day objectively? And so when you think about this, you think about your smartphone, right? So he now gets worried thinking his smartphone's over there, just had a small panic attack in front of audience. All right, I would hold up my smartphone and say, think of all the information your smartphone has about you day to day passively. I'm not talking about using an app or an EMA or anything like that. It knows when you pick it up, right? It knows how many steps you take. It knows how wobbly your steps are. It knows how much you're communicating with other people, how often you're texting. It knows how fast you're typing. It knows all of these things about you in a continuous manner over time, right? That information is there. We all use it without thinking about it here, okay? So this work that we're doing with Thomas Edison, or I always call it Thomas Edison. What a fantastic name for an electrical engineer. Be careful what you name your children, all right? So I work with Dr. Edison Tomas, who's a fantastic electrical engineering. Did he have any other option besides that with a name like that? So our group has developed what's called the Texans app, which is an app that you put on your phone and it just takes the passive data, no active intervention required, just takes that passive data, puts it in the cloud in a secure, de-identified manner, and then we enroll people to do clinical assessments of cognition and everyday functioning over time, whether you have a diagnosis or don't have a diagnosis, right? And so we'll be able to look cross-sectionally at individuals who have a diagnosis and don't have a diagnosis, but we'll also be able to track longitudinal changes over time. And let's see how do these passive markers, these passive digital biomarkers, what can they tell us about cognition and functioning in the real world? And these are preliminary findings. These have not been peer-reviewed, so you've been warned, but we got our first chance to play with the data, and the results are fascinating, all right? So you probably can't see this very well, but let me describe to you. So typing metrics, right? So how fast you type, right? There's basically a metric that is how long does your finger stay on the screen before you pick it up and move it to the next screen, all right? And so the speed with which those keystrokes happen and even the duration that your finger stays on a key on a smartphone screen done passively reliably separates individuals who have cognitive impairment from that don't have cognitive impairment, right? Gait asymmetries, right? So your phone always knows your steps, but it also has a calculation about, the imbalance in your steps. That can meaningfully separate in a passive manner individuals with and without cognitive impairment. So this is always be recruiting. We're in the last year of this study. If you know someone who wants to help, who do you talk to? Rovi. But we're very excited about the fact that these technologies that are increasingly ubiquitous may give us unique windows into real world functioning and actionable information, both from an outcome measurement standpoint, but also maybe the opportunity to identify decline early, intervene early, and serve as an outcome measure. I'm excited about where this can go. So the final question that all this comes about is one that I really didn't want to get dragged into, but sometimes the question gets asked enough times to where you have to go answer it. So ever since I've been talking about tech and aging, I get the question of, okay, all right, yeah, we're all going to use it, but surely this is making my brain worse. All right, using all this tech just has to be making the brain worse day to day. Okay, and I am real good at dodging questions, and so I dodged this one for a lot of years. But when it gets asked enough times, you have to start answering. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of someone who was born in like 1945, the world that we came into cognitively versus the world that we're living in now, right? So again, you think about the changes in commerce, coins, counting coins, paper checks, right? Credit cards, Amazon Buy It Now, something that I'm way too familiar with, right? You think about searching for information, card catalogs and encyclopedias. I love encyclopedias. That's how you figured out stuff versus you Google it or ask a LLM it, right? You want to remember something, right? Now we might be using digital calendars, but we used to probably rely on a lot of that memory ourselves, right? Using paper maps versus trying to figure out your GPS. You think about communication mediated by postal service versus text, email, simultaneous chat, right? Simultaneously. This is an enormous cognitive shift that our brains, which have been very slow to change and change with our environment over time, have lived this generation. These digital pioneers have lived through a titanic shift in the way that the environment works, right? So what is the cognitive impact of this dramatic and sustained change in the environment? So you can probably think that there's two hypotheses you'd have out there. One would be a digital dementia hypothesis, right? This idea that all this tech, right, between being passive screen time, not using your innate memory systems, being more distracted by all the things, are just driving us to be more demented, right? So that's one hypothesis you could have out there, right? But in our group, we think a lot about the idea of reserve. Reserve is a concept that's well known in the ADRD space. And this is the idea that lifestyle habits and health habits and social habits and these lifestyle factors can actually help the brain tolerate changes in Alzheimer's pathology. In other words, biology is not destiny. Reserve helps buffer or mediate some of the relationship between what's going on in your brain and how it impacts you cognitively and functionally. And so we've been toying with the idea of technological reserve. How does technology change the brain and change the environment? And you think about the tech as we've been describing it. Tech can promote engagement with cognitive complexity. Tech can facilitate social connectedness. It may not be as good as the real thing, but it's better than not being connected at all, we think, right? Tech may allow for these compensatory behaviors. You know, maybe we can get things out of the head and into the system to do things. So what are we seeing in the literature in terms of, are we seeing digital dementia in digital pioneers, or are we seeing the birth of technological reserve? And so this paper, I'm very pleased to say, is going to come out in Nature Human Behavior soon. And we looked at studies, cohort studies that looked at everyday spontaneous tech use. So don't get me started on brain games. Don't get me started on specific app training. Different sermon I have for that one. You can ask poor Dr. Miss, who has heard that speech a few hundred times. And we wanted to look at these broad cohort studies from around the world. And we found 136 studies, 57 of which were compatible with our meta-analysis. Over 400,000 older adults, mean age of 68 years old, from around the world, high-income, low-income countries, that looked at things like internet use, email use, smartphone use, and had a cognitive or dementia outcome at the end here, okay? And the results were striking. You can't see the details, but to the right of that curve would be increased dementia risk with using technology. The further left was less risk of developing cognitive impairment and dementia. The answer was clear. Older adults who are engaging with digital technologies may have less risk of cognitive impairment and dementia, okay? Yeah, but everyone in a room full of aging researchers say, okay, all right, I get this, right? So you might think about things like, well, individuals who would have been early adopters would have more education, higher socioeconomic status, all of these things may be kind of clear markers of reduced risk of dementia in and of themselves. But when you actually look at the studies that control for those factors, the effect seems to remain, right? So there may be some there in terms of elements of technology that can actually help reduce risk for cognitive decline. So for our digital pioneers, for the generation that brought us the internet, our gift is now to understand what it's done to our brains, right? So despite all these years of the digital revolution, we're not seeing digital dementia as of today. And there's actually decent evidence that for a positive impact, at least compared to non-adopters, okay? Will this hold for digital natives? I don't know. Stay tuned, all right? But the association gives us another thread to pull here, okay? So this is where our lab is going, is that there's a lot of great information out there to help us disentangle this better. What aspects of technology use seem to bear the strongest association with cognitive decline and cognitive impairment? How can we help find tech that helps and leave out tech that harms? There will be tech that harms. Let's find it, identify how it works, and avoid it. And how do we enable tech that promotes complexity, connection, compensatory behaviors? In other words, we build tech, right? We shape our tools, then our tools shape us, right? So let's shape tools for those with cognitive impairment to bring the good things that technology has to bear for an aging brain. We want to find technology that develops technological reserve. We want to find technologies that can help prevent cognitive decline by promoting complexity. We want to find tools that can help us compensate for cognitive problems, right? And then if an individual is impacted by this disease, how do we keep them home, safe, longer? Right? This is where technological reserve can take us. This is what our group is passionate about. We want to build technology that cares, technology that adapts to the changes that are occurring with age, technology that helps in caregiving. It doesn't have to be something that just happens. We can learn from those who are using this in the real world, take the lessons from them, and build interventions that help. So this is what I do. This is what our group does. This is what we're passionate about. The world is changing. We want to help find ways to use this technology to help people. I stand up here and get an award, which I am so thankful for, but this is not my story. This is the story of literally thousands of patients and research participants over time. This is a work of dear collaborators, Mike Scullin, a dear friend of mine at Baylor University, who has been with me all along this journey. Lots of collaborators, postdocs, research coordinators. So I appreciate your support of our work. I appreciate your support of this amazing team of people who are trying to do our part to help real people function better. Thank y'all.
Thank you for that amazing talk. I think everybody's now feeling better about using their smartphones. It is our tradition in these seminars to open the questions to students and the general public before we have the often long-winded academic start. So could we get some questions from a student or the general public? Yes, yes, I see one.
Very interesting talk. My question is, observing my mother, and she's probably just started dementia, using the phone that really helped her to order things in the past, but now become a burden to over ordering things that just over and over that just keep coming because she won't be even remember that she had that orders. So I guess the safety of using smartphone for elder people is also very important. And if there's some kind of technology, well, I'm sure many people have been thinking about that, how to prevent those things happen, that will be really useful.
Absolutely. I want to bottle you up, and let's write a paper. There's already starting to be some fascinating evidence in this space. So there's a group, I think it's out of University of Pennsylvania. You've seen those apps that track your online financial activity, right? And they did a fascinating study where they enrolled people prospectively into a study, and they looked at the number of abnormal transactions or the number of aberrant spending behaviors that got flagged. And sure enough, you would see that with that online financial tracking, you could see that those sorts of metrics would separate out individuals with and without cognitive impairment. All right. So this adds the kind of 2 points to that. First of all, if these behaviors are occurring online, right, then can we develop systems that capture those and stop those from happening? I'm amazed by the people I serve. And so I had a caregiver come into clinic the other day who was having a problem with a lot of scams going on. That's another area where a lot of this stuff happens. And they were getting some in the mail scams and in the email scams and in the text message scams. And so this caregiver's did great. Went to USPS. They have a service called Before Day Delivery where they scan in all a digital image, right? So he reviews the mail before it comes in and tells her which ones to put right in the trash. He's logged into her iMessage account and tells her, nope, that's not a legit one, don't do it, right? And then also they have a shared email account. Now, right now, he's doing amazing modifying that, but that's a lot of work on him. Can we develop automation to do some of those things and identify and stop those behaviors? This is where we built this world. Now can we make it accessible and safe, right? And that is the next great challenge, but I think there is some hope there. It's also a very important area to study. There's a neuropsychologist, Duke Hahn, out of, I believe he's at North Carolina, Duke, and he does amazing work on kind of financial literacy, financial scams, and cognitive impairment. And so we need more people in this space for this exact reason. That's fantastic. Thank you.
That was a great question. Could we ask another one from students or the general public? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, great talk. I really love it. And maybe it's a dumb question. It's what kind of population or what age threshold do you think is proper to say these are senior people, these are elder population, and we need to pay attention to, I'm just curious about the choice of the threshold of the elder or senior population.
Yeah, absolutely. So exactly. The question of what counts as an older adult is a great way to pick a fight. Well done, my friend. I'm going to answer that through a couple of different angles. So If you're in the Alzheimer's disease and related dementia space, right, the biggest risk factor for Alzheimer's is age. In other words, there are early onset cases of Alzheimer's disease where it happens in the 40s, early 50s. That does happen. It's relatively rare. It's almost universally related to one of 3 genetic mutations. So we usually don't think about that. We start to see rates of Alzheimer's disease be roughly, depending on the studies you read, start doubling about every 5 years after age 60. So about 1% at 60, 2% at 65, 4% at 70, and you tend to see it start kind of doubling upwards for there, such that by the time you get to age 80 or beyond, like current appropriate use criteria for amyloid PET scans to actually see if you have Alzheimer's changes, they typically won't get them slid past appropriate use criteria because the frequency of Alzheimer-related brain changes may be so prevalent once you get over age 80. So in our sample, we part of it is our clinic. Our clinic skews an average age of kind of mid-70s is when people show up. So convenient samples-wise, that's where we go there. We use different cut points. So like in the passive activity detection one, we start with people that are over age 65, right? For our intervention studies, we'll take people down to 50 because we didn't want to exclude individuals who do have those early onset conditions that we see in clinics. So I don't think there's a perfect answer to that, but clinically, those are kind of the ranges that we shoot at. In technology space, you'll see all sorts of kind of definitions of this. We had a reviewer, it was reviewer 3 for that meta-analysis paper, but actually asked that question. So we do have a sensitivity analysis where we go back and we show studies based on 70 versus 60 versus 65. So all have won and all get prizes in some of our papers.
Wonderful. We have time for one more question from anyone, if opening it up now. Yes.
Could you comment on the use of tech to increase awareness?
Yeah, the use of tech to increase awareness. And awareness kind of has a lot of different kind of ways you can definitionize that, if you will, operationalize awareness. One of the things that I find most fascinating is the increasing number of older adults who will engage with technology for the purpose of getting civic, political information, getting health-related information, right? As well as getting information about hobbies and activities, right? And one of the trends that you're seeing with older adults who are using tech is that those individuals who are engaging with technology kind of as a hobby sort of way. So for example, in our COVID study of older adults' use of technology during COVID, we saw this interesting correlation that I think about all the time. Correlation's not causation, but I think about it a lot, where the older adults who were using YouTube to look up tech help when they had a tech problem. In other words, if they had a tech problem, where do you turn? Do you turn to a kid, you turn to a spouse, you turn to a grandkid, or you go to YouTube? Those individuals who were turning to YouTube were also the ones who were reporting that they were going to continue using tech longer over time. And so I think from a digital literacy standpoint, there's this virtuous cycle of those individuals engaging with technology to increase awareness, then further facilitate their ability to engage with the technologies that may be most useful more, and it can feed on itself. Again, that's a suspicion, not a fact, but yeah, I think about that. That kind of inspires the C in our model of connection and compensatory behaviors, but also complexity. I think that just like for my son, these digital windows open up a world that might otherwise be closed. And on its good days, the internet offers a really cool world.
On that note, please join me in thanking Dr. Benj. Thank you, Dr.